Sometimes to cooperate with people, you just have to show them that you can see it their way. So if you know me, then you know that I work in software and I work in IT. And there's a lot of technical skills that come with that. Now, you might be surprised to hear that one of the skills I pride myself on the most, and I think has come the most in handy, is my ability to get along with people. Now, this might not sound like a big deal, but it actually really is in the software field, and we're going to talk about that. Now, when you have a disagreement with someone, the very tempting thing to do is to try to prove that your line of thinking is the correct one, that you are right and they are wrong. Now, a lot of things might go through your head when this happens, and you're going to be thinking of them in a certain way, and a lot of times it's not very good. The first way you might be thinking of them is as though they're malicious. Now, if you're thinking that in totality, you're almost certainly wrong. That the idea that this person is a Disney villain and they just want to see pain is most likely not the truth. Now, beyond that, if somebody is thinking about you in the light of, I want bad things to happen to them, they've probably come to that conclusion, and your best course of action is to dispel that feeling they have and try to get to a point where they do not want bad things to come to you. Now, how do we get to these points where we form these malicious thoughts? Well, the first one is ignorance. Now, ignorance sounds like a bad word, like I'm calling someone ignorant, that means they are somehow bad. That's not what I mean when I say ignorant. Ignorance simply means that you don't know something. So working in software, I can tell you this comes up a lot, because if I'm writing software for somebody, that's likely because they don't know how to do it themselves. Now, I've taken classes where I know the right way to do these things and what they should best do in order to make the product they receive the best thing. But it can be difficult to get them on that same page because they are not only ignorant to the best way, they're ignorant to the fact that there is one. We're kind of used to, in society, the ability to just ask for a service, pay for it, and receive. But in a lot of things, like software, and probably medicine too, this is not how it works. This is going to be a team effort for us to achieve this for you. Now, the thing is, they don't know this, and there's no point in getting upset with them because they don't know this. It's one of those things where, how would they know it? That's one big question to ask yourself whenever you're dealing with ignorance, is how would this person know this? How would they have figured this out? You may know how you know it. You have to ask yourself, would they have been in the position to know it themselves? Another important thing to do is to acknowledge your own ignorance. That, when we write software for people, part of the thing we go in with is needing to understand this person or group or whatever it is, their day-to-day, their needs. What do they need to happen? How is the software going to help them make that thing happen? So this can be very difficult because it's hard enough to figure out how to walk in your own life, much less in someone else's. And it will never be perfect. But the first step comes with just realizing that there is a knowledge gap. And I think it's always important to realize whenever you're thinking of someone else as being ignorant, that they know things that you don't too. And if it's important to you to communicate to them the thing that you know that they don't, there's a certain tact to doing it. And it starts in a friendly way. You can't really push knowledge on people. If somebody doesn't want to learn, and that again may be because they don't know they need to, pushing it hard generally isn't going to work. You have to kind of build a better rapport with them before you can push them to learn something that they may not have been, intent on learning. Incompetence is the next thing. And that is what we actually generally assume. Most of us don't start with ignorance. We assume incompetence, when ignorance is really more the answer. That, this person is really perfectly competent. There's just something that you know that they don't. And if you assume someone is incompetent, that I'd say is a first mistake. But let's say you're right. Let's say they actually are incompetent. Well, you need to think about the situation you're in. You have really two options. You can become malicious towards them and try to get them out of the situation. That would be malicious if they themselves want to be in the situation. Or you can work with them to help them to be more competent. And a lot of times you would be surprised how well this can work. You may look at someone who is absolutely terrible at something, and a few months or maybe even years later, they're starting to do okay with it. And the truth is, if you are sort of more or less stuck with them in this situation, well, then it makes sense to help them to be more competent, because their incompetence being a target of your dissatisfaction doesn't do them any favors, and it really doesn't do you any favors. Because what it will do for you is it will cause you stress, and it will give you an outside element to blame for things that go poorly, which will cause you to not look inward and improve yourself. Because even if they're completely incompetent, I guarantee that you aren't perfect. So the better way to approach it is to think of it more as part of your responsibility to help them to be more competent. And I have seen this, that over time, people I would look at and judge sometimes superficially to an extent as, not being competent, become competent. And it's also important to think about all of the things that you're not competent in, that the times that you have tried to do something that you wanted to do and you found yourself to be incompetent. You probably didn't think of it that way. You probably said, well, I'm just not good at that, right? And that's okay. We tend to treat ourselves a little better than we treat others sometimes. But it's important to analyze how they might be feeling in the situation, how they would feel if you were to lash out at them, and then think about how you felt in those situations and how maybe you've improved in situations where you weren't very good at something when you had support. Giving support can be one of the best things that you can do. Difference in taste. Now, this is kind of a different way that we find ourselves at odds with each other. There's a reason we have small talk, where we talk about the weather, and that's because we're all human, and almost all humans don't like being hot. They don't like being cold. They don't like being wet, and we're afraid or dislike in some way lightning. So we make small talk because these are things that we know we can all find common ground on. Go far beyond small talk and you risk finding a difference in taste with someone. And that can form kind of a rift between you and the other person, at least in your head, and you may tend to assume also in their head. And we do small talk because we want to stay on good terms and we don't want to make, distance between us. Now, this can go the other way, where we might form a better connection if we find somebody that has our same tastes. And that's why we tend to slowly get to that point. Now, when thinking in differences of taste, a lot of times the end game is not going to work out that well. You're probably not going to turn that party person into a book nerd, and vice versa, right? An important thing to think, though, is that most of our tastes and our personalities, by extent, are shaped by our environment and sometimes just pure randomness. So think about being a book nerd. You're a person that likes to stay home and read books, and that is what you do in your spare time. And you may have gotten there because you picked up a book when you were young and you read it and it was excellent. Now, there's somebody that may have been equally a book nerd, but when they were young, they picked up a book and it was terrible. And so it shaped their view of that thing, and they didn't pick up as many books anymore as where you picked up many, many more. And you were willing to get past the bad experiences because you had that very good first experience, whereas they may not have even tried again. And if they did, they would have had a lot less will to go through it. Now, on the other side, if you're like a party person and you meet somebody who is a book nerd, it might be hard to relate down the line, but I think it's important to kind of look in yourself and realize that no matter where you put yourself on any of these spectrums, you know, there's the one I'm using as an example, and then there's people that really like exercise, and there's people that don't. And you've probably, to some degree, had positive and negative experiences. And I do that a lot, you know, when it comes to programming, because I'm somebody that really likes programming, which puts me in the minority, in my opinion. Most people, you know, even in my area, I know, haven't had good experiences with it. But I've also had bad experiences with it. So I can complain up there with everybody else when it comes to the subject that I'm truly passionate about and truly enjoy. Technology is a vaguer way to go in my head, that somebody complains about having trouble with technology. Well, I have plenty of experience with that, even though I love technology when it comes down to it. And I think that type of thought process can help, that even if there's something that you truly love, you can relate to the downside of it. If you're a runner and you love running, I have no doubt that you have had a bad experience one day. Maybe one day where you were sick, or one day that you went too far, or it was too hot, or you didn't drink enough water, you didn't stretch well enough. And if somebody talks about how they just can't stand it, think about those bad experiences and relate to them on that. But at the end of the day, a difference in taste is hard to bridge because these are, you know, things we formed in our personality, and there are situations where, you know, we become hard-formed against each other's priorities, and that's because, you know, we find comfort in the things we find comfort in, you know, having the personalities that we have. And these other people are, you know, the opposite, that their comfort zone is the other place. So we want to steer maybe a group in the direction where we can be comfortable. Now, there's good reasoning for this, because if you are stuck out of your comfort zone and they're in their comfort zone, you're going to be at a big disadvantage and probably not be happy. But the vice versa is true, that you have to realize if you're pushing for the way you see it, the way you want it, the way you're comfortable, then they're going to be outside of their comfort zone. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're debating things that, you know, surround your taste. Difference in priority is the hardest one to bridge, though, because difference in priority literally means that because of your situation, you have a different goal than this person that you're trying to get along with. Now, think about a debate. This is a perfect example of difference in priority. Or think about a video game where your goal is to win and your opponent's goal is to win. There's no real chance that you're going to be able to bridge that gap, but you can at least have some kind of camaraderie unless this is a fight to the death or something. So difference in priority, though, generally isn't that clear-cut, that a person may be in a role where their priority is to, you know, protect a system, say, I'm again going from my own experience, and keep something to be sustainable. That would be something, you know, of say a manager that is trying to keep a server running at its peak. But then on the other hand, a project manager where their goal is to deliver to their customer, you know, you have a lot of things in line here, that you both want the system to work, obviously. The project manager doesn't want to crash the server, but on the other hand, the person running the server doesn't want there to be no use for that server where there's no application to run on it. Now, this is a very simplified example, that you have times where your priorities are weighted differently, and these are the ones that you can actually work at. And obviously, the easy thing to do and what you should do is try to get the best understanding of that person's priority as you can. And sometimes it might be hard to understand, and it's easy to fall back on the incompetence or perhaps ignorance thing, that you think this person is incompetent and this is why they don't agree with me, or they are ignorant and I just need to teach them. And the second one, that actually could be true, but again, it's important to then circle back and make sure you teach yourself, or have them teach you, better yet, about what are their priorities, why are they what they are, and how can you work together to achieve both sets of priorities. Now, again, this isn't always possible, but you can at least bridge the gap a little bit. Now, why is this important? The reason this is important, unfortunately, is kind of counter to how a lot of our society works. And the reason I'm doing this video and the reason I have these methodologies is because I want us to work better as a society. And I think in our, last generation, we've made a lot of progress with this. That we tend to have a hierarchical society, and the way to be at the top of the hierarchy is to be in control. Now, what comes with being in control? It means that what you know is what's important. That what you like, your comfort zone, your area, is important. Unfortunately, this is very limited, and there is only so far you can go up a narrow peak. Now, if we think of it differently and think that a wider peak is better, that means we need to be inclusive. And this has been shown that diverse groups do better. Now, I think that part of the reason for this is those diverse groups have taken the time to think about each other's needs, each other's gaps, and also themselves, how those other people can teach them. Now, if we jump to the easy conclusions, and sometimes those conclusions are not 100% incorrect, that these people are, ignorant, or worse, they're incompetent, then we tend to just write them off, and at some point they may no longer be part of our group, which we think at the time, in a bit of our malicious thought process at this point, makes us stronger. But it actually doesn't. It makes us weaker. When it comes to a person that in a certain area, of course, you think is ignorant or incompetent, if you could raise them to the level, maybe nowhere near you are, but of just being competent enough or knowledgeable enough, they can then lend the skills they have that you don't have to a situation. Beyond that, if you're not trying to be the leader of some kind of group, just being included is important. And if you approach people in an adversarial, defensive way, that's a real quick way to put them in that defensive mindset where they become malicious towards you, and then you just kind of have a fight on your hands. So having a fight on your hands, I don't care who you are, is generally not a good thing. You want people to agree with you and cooperate with you to a degree. They don't have to love you. They don't have to completely be on your side or have your same priorities or have your same tastes, but you're better off with them than you are without them.